take this further. We can make asynchronous programming easier with async await. So with TypeScript, there is something called async await, and async await, what it helps us do is we can have a synchronous flow that looks synchronous, and then we can have a try catch block that will catch all errors for us. For example, in here we know that our find one is doing some asynchronous operation, returning a whole bunch of callback, and after this we'll do an error check in here. After we'll do an error check in here, we'll also do some other error check in here, and then we'll fire another asynchronous request here to our database to check to create a session for us. And this can become a lot and a lot and a lot. As we know, we'll have what we call the callback hell. But how can we mitigate this? So TypeScript async await makes use of promises, right? And remember, we set our target to ES6. So we know one thing with TypeScript is that it only supports async await when the target is set to ES6, because it's gonna make use of something called generators. But we need to understand that everything that we're doing here, we're simply compiling it down to an ES6 compatible way. And if we take a look at our application, we can then convert this promise here. We can do some asynchronous style here by having something called the async keyword. So what the async keyword, it will mark this function as an async function, right? And since our user that creates takes returns a promise, we can await this. So this is a task that can be awaited. So for example, if we are doing this, we're still passing in functions. Yeah, promises solve some problems, but promises still take functions, you know, asynchronous functions, and you have to pass these, you know. Your flow control kind of be messy. But async await helps solve this by, we can take out our then method out. We can get rid of this then method, and then make use of this as if everything goes fine, it will return back a created user. So instead of doing this and passing in functions, which can be pretty tedious, we can just do something very nice here called doing like this. For example, we can say var created user is equals to user.create. But then instead of our then method here, what we'll do is that we are going to return a created user when a user successfully creates a user, right? So we don't need this here. And then this one can go back into our normal flow like this. So I brought out this function with the created user out here, so this will be returned, and then we don't need this then method, right? We'll get rid of that. And how about error handling? We'll get back to that later, but we'll get rid of this here, or we can just, you know, for example, I can just take this and let me just say here, and I will paste it here, and I will get rid of that callback function. So if you can see that this is pretty synchronous. But how do we know when an error happens? We can know if an error happens in our try catch block. So we can just easily use a simple try catch block, and then we can set it in the try block, and then we'll have a catch. Our catch will take an error, and then we can then do this here. So basically, what does this do? So what this does is it do things synchronously. If we actually have another asynchronous thing, for example, after we create a user, a sign up, maybe we want to create a session, right? We can just go ahead and do like a session.create and then we'll take this created user from here, which is kind of synchronous. It means you have access to all your variables. Our scoping does not, you know, have to be based on where the function is or where the function is not. So, but there's something also about TypeScript. To tell this async function that this is an asynchronous thing that has to evaluate something later, we have to use what we call the await keyword. So if you see here, we have async and we have await. If we also need to await something like say session that create, maybe this is also returns a promise, as we know. So we can say session that create, and then we'll pass it in, and then what we'll do is we can see we await this to create a session, and all of this will be synchronous, and we can also assign this back to a value of the result of the session creation. And if there was any error that occurred, it will throw this error here. So we don't need this for now, right? All we need to do is we can try to test our application with this current, you know, way. So I'm using a return here because I want to end my flow in my catch block. I don't want it to do like a double sending twice. So we can also run back our test, but first of all, let's see how this compiles down to our normal JavaScript, because async await is not currently supported in Node.js or the VueJs engine. So basically TypeScript does a compilation and creates a helper method for us. So this helper method it creates is called the awaiter here. So basically you can see it's making use of the for field, and it's doing something called using the generators. Generators is a little bit of an advanced topic, but a generator function is just a function that we can yield some values and tell it when it's done, you know. It's kind of like synchronous iteration that will continuously yield values. So it's making use of the yield keyword here. What it's doing here is just creating a new promise with a resolve and a reject, and our generator hits the next value, and if there was any error it will just reject it and, you know, continue stepping on each and every route, on every value there.